Good day, everyone. Today I will be sharing to you another method in English language teaching, which is all about embodied learning. At the end of this presentation, you are expected to define what embodied learning is, distinguish its principles and the pedagogical relevance, and learn how to bring in the concept of embodied learning in the classroom. Now let's get started. Learning is an enjoyable phase for every learner when they get a chance to know and interpret things that are new to them. According to many researchers, letting the students do the act is one of the most effective techniques that involves physical movements and interactivity, and that is where the context of embodied learning comes in. But what on earth is it, and what are the benefits? Embodied learning, according to Foley and Wilson in 2013, is a multimodal and playful process that requires the involvement of the human body in the cognitive process. In this method, one does not only offer an intellectual way of teaching but also involve the whole body. In short, it's about using the human body as a learning tool. Embodied learning approach is based on the idea of an inseparable link between body and mind in learning, aiming for teaching methods that promote children's active engagement in the classroom. According to Stolz, in 2015, the brain, while important, is not the only source of behavior and cognition. Situated cognition highlights the need to include the physical and the emotional and the social in the learning environment. Furthermore, he stated that embodiment connects with lived experience as the outcome of sensory engagement with the environment. Cognition is actually situated in the constant feedback between the person and the environment. For example, young children in play-based activities do not compute and think through everything to provide correct responses, right? Instead, they continuously provide perceptual and emotional responses, which will often be unintentional and unconscious. Indeed, a significant part of the power of play as a learning tool comes from the many ways in which children, by engaging in joyful activity with a sense of wonder, learn through embodiment. Now let's talk about the pedagogical principles involved in approaching learning as a process of embodiment. First principle we have is body and mind work together in learning. Second, movement and concepts are connected. Third, action and thinking takes place simultaneously. Fourth, science and art influence and support each other. Fifth, the physical and the ideal are in dialogue with each other. Sixth, reality and imagination are intertwined. And lastly, the living body and the lived body are united in forming human consciousness. So these principles are important for pedagogy, for they make sense of two natural learning inclinations of children, which are the creativity and expression. Let us have first the creativity. First, action and the impulse to create are among the most basic of human drives. According to Bullock in 2016, people achieve contextual knowledge by tinkering and making and experimenting with tangible tools. Next, let's have the expression. Creative activities based on the primacy of self-expression and aesthetics are more likely to engage learners than academic activities. According to Bradley et al. In 2013, when learning environments are coupled with the arts, schools become places of discovery where personal experiences are more easily channeled. They offer challenge, which is the lever for motivation and learning. Now, in combining these two driving forces, the creativity and expression in terms of skills, embodied learning can be understood as the conscious use of creative experiences and the active involvement of students to champion the acquisition of knowledge. Embodied learning is closely connected with the idea of learning by doing and by engaging with the environment, which are significant aspects of experiential learning. Although both approaches share the importance of interaction, experimentation, and the ambition to offer students a comprehensive learning experience, in embodied learning, the focus shifts from the cognitive to the emotional, physical, and the creative aspects. But how do we really bring in the concept of embodied learning in classrooms? The technique is actually very simple. You just need some movements in your lessons. It not only improves student interest in learning but engages them in the most pleasing way. However, teachers are finding it really hard to find ways to bring in the concept of embodied learning in classrooms. The combination of tangible intelligent objects, wearables, motion tracking, sensor technology, and some interactive videos can give an ultimate outcome of this learning approach. Here, let us have a look at the strategies or methods or activities by which you can make embodied learning an integral part of a classroom. First we have here is Lego building. This is one of the best ways in stimulating vision and patience in students while fostering their creativity. This activity can be used effectively to learn counting and measurements, patterns and symmetry, and also illustrating stories as well as visualizing different concepts. Next, we also have here Connect-based educational games. Schools are now making use of advanced educational gaming systems using motion sensing to take learning to the next level. The idea of learning subjects such as English with just textbook assignments is now getting replaced with such game-based learning. The advanced options such as Microsoft's Kinect Motion Sensor incorporates physical gestures with intelligent thinking in order to find solutions for such games. Third we have here is act out worksheet tasks. Rather than simply doing the textbook assignments with papers and pen, encourage the students to come out and just make an act of the worksheet tasks. Fourth is field trips. Taking a break from the four walls of a classroom can be a real boost to the students. Engage them with field trips once in a while when they get a chance to interact with the environment along with subject areas. When they experience the lessons of their subject, it is very easy for them to understand and memorize it for long without the additional effort of typing learning. Fifth is energy breaks. In addition to all these activities that can make the subjects more close to the student, getting some energy breaks can actually add great value to improving their alertness. Handling a set of drowsy students can be really challenging for the teachers and the learning session would be less productive. Warm-up exercise between the sessions can act as icebreakers and relieve boredom while improving the blood pumping. Jump shot movements, swimming mimics, crossovers, and weight training movements, or just simple arm rotations can do the trick. You can also include music and simple dance moves with all the students in the class, and yeah, it can really be fun and they would easily get refreshed. So those are just a few among the many ways through which you can bring in the concept of embodied learning in the classroom. In embodied learning, the power balance changes. In many classrooms, students have next to no power. The teacher tells students what to do and they carry out the instruction. Embodied pedagogy is actually about giving power back to the students. The classroom rarely allows for the use of prior knowledge. Embodied pedagogy changes this. Students know their own body tests, so through this tool, they can appreciate learned experiences which shape who they are. Let's take a look on the history, a little bit of history of this embodied pedagogy. John Dewey actually proposed that students ought to use all of their bodily senses to learn, including touch, taste, sound, sight, and smell. Although drama, dance, and physical education classes often capitalize on these senses, this rarely happens in English. Many years later, Noam Chomsky and Del Hines discussed similar theories in regard to second language acquisition. Tasks related to embodied pedagogy often involve authentic use of the target language, including role plays, practice interviews, and social tasks. Remember that not all students will immediately appreciate this teaching method, this embodied pedagogy, especially if they have been sitting in chairs for the past 15 years. However, Someone or you as a teacher can really guarantee that in implementing this kind of pedagogy in the classroom, definitely there will be no regrets. Now let's talk about embodied language. One of the cognitive domains that have been most appealing to mentalistic theories is possibly language. In the 70s of the 20th century, Chomsky described it as an innate phenomenon of the mind expressed by symbols. Brain imaging studies in the last decades have shed a different light on language. If words were actually symbols, abstract entities of the mind with no connection to the body performing a mental task would not activate brain regions related to sensory motor processes occurred during language acquisition and use. In fact, if we observe how children acquire language, they perform a multitude of sensory motor acts. Children hear and repeat sequences of sounds or the words, just like symbols, but these symbols are related to objects they perceive or they perceive with their senses or to actions they perform. According to Adams in 2016, children cannot be prevented from touching, dropping, smelling the objects, and putting them into their mouths. And according to Pulver-Muller in 1999, therefore, in the brain's language, a word must be represented as a sensory motor network that mirrors all experiences collected to the concept. Now let's have second language learning and the body. At first attempt to integrate the body in learning, second language was made in the total physical response or the very famous TPR developed by Asher in the 1960s. In the TPR, the teacher gave commands in second language. Learners listened, comprehended, and executed the commands. The TPR did not require learners to speak at an early age. This was actually done in order to take off pressure from language production. Learning second language through commands was meant to stimulate native or simulate native language acquisition. In fact, children are asked by the caregivers to do things in order to interact with the adult's world. The total physical response, or the TPR, did not actually focus on syntax and used mainly imperative verbs connected to the vocabulary. Consequently, verbs that could be put in the imperative form or communicative acts that do not need the imperative were not actually taught. There were criticisms addressed with this kind of method as suitable for early stages of the second language acquisition in which vocabulary essentials can be acquired through action. Despite this, over the decades, this TPR or the total physical response made its way in practice because it is effective in supporting word recognition. That's according to Usher. However, there was no empirical investigation that is conducted on the impact on memory for second language words and phrases if learners perform commands while learning. The argument is in favor of the method have remained qualitative and descriptive in their nature. Involving the body in the learning experience. There are actually many other ways to involve the body in a learning experience. You can have students say something with a different emotional conviction, and this can work also in a virtual space. Another is to have them lined up in a line depending on what is true for them. You can think of an affirmative and negative statements. And the third is to have students improvise scenes in which they mime verbs or adverbs or prepositions, placements. You can also include dialogue, and you've got a role play that would take learners a dramatic step toward the real life use of grammar integrated with meaning. Embodied pedagogy is flexible too. This method of teaching is flexible and could also be applied to, we have here warm-up activities or the games which have pertinence to the lesson. Second, stories whereby students can act out different sections. Job interviews where one student asks questions and the other answers. And role-playing social situations just like ordering food, asking for directions, etc. Now, how do we ensure success In embodied learning, to ensure success, there are few considerations. The teacher must create a safe space through established protocols, which may include not being afraid to model activities, including the physical ones. Good directions are also essential, and also it's important to consider the stage of learning. In traditional grammar book exercises, learners can focus laser like on producing the correct form. After they have had ample practice, they can level up by adding the social features of a dynamic, interactive task. When you think about it, it is very easy. It's a very easy thing that justifies the place of movement, gesture, role play, and improve in the classroom. These activities are really the stepping stones to the cognitive demands of the real world. So, what do your students really need? The next time we teachers print off worksheets or choose an activity from the textbook, we really need to ask ourselves, is this really what we want? Or is this really what our students need? It seems worksheets occasionally become the crutch teachers use in exchange for creativity. Remember that ESL teachers should not fear allowing students the opportunity to be creative. After all, this is how our students would learn best. Though written tasks can build knowledge, they often provide students with no relevance for using the target language. So, the best thing that we can do is to let them act. Let ourselves implement embodied learning in our language classrooms. And that is all for my presentation. Thank you so much for watching and for listening. God bless us all.